Next up, we have Richard Church again. This time he's going to talk about the Articles of Freedom, which was the result of the 2009 Continental Congress, which was put on by We the People Foundation or organization. Richard, let us know what's in the Articles of Freedom.
I'm back again. Last year, I had the opportunity to represent the state of Wisconsin as one of 3 delegates to the Continental Congress 2009. And, you know, we stand at a historic point in our nation's progress, not unlike the time when we declared independence from Great Britain. We stand at a time where we see government abuses of power, we see our rights violated, and when the colonists felt that they had no other recourse, that the Crown of Great Britain was unresponsive to their petitions for redress of grievance, they called for a Continental Congress. And if you remember that history of the First and Second Continental Congress, the First Continental Congress basically decided to send one last petition to the Crown with the understanding that if their grievances were not redressed, they would have a Second Continental Congress to decide how to proceed from there. And it was the Second Continental Congress that declared independence and then became the government under the Articles of Confederation. And this Continental Congress was the idea, this Continental Congress in 2009 was the idea of We the People Foundation. And if you've never heard of Bob Schultz and We the People Foundation, Bob Schultz for years has been going through the legal process of petitioning for a redress of these violations of the Constitution. And on many different issues. In fact, Bob has a couple of current cases that are in court. One against the banker bailout that passed under the Bush administration, and he's got some other the National Clean Elections lawsuit, if you've heard of that. Those are some of the current things. But over the past years, he's presented many of these petitions that have gone through the court system. And one of his arguments is that since the Constitution guarantees your right to petition for a redress of grievances, that there's a responsibility on the part of the government to respond to such petitions. And most of the things that he's tried to present as these grievances about constitutional violations, you don't even get a response. And so the idea was formed to have a Continental Congress. And what they did was they held elections in every state. Here in Wisconsin, we had 2 voting centers in the state. One of them was right here at the Olympia Resort. By the way, if you're involved with many liberty organizations in the state, you know that Olympia Resort has kind of become the hub of activity in the state for these different groups, and that's because of the support of Rick Eckert, who owns this resort, and he's very willing to work with groups. And we're thankful for him in working with us to put together this event here this weekend. But one of the voting centers was here. We set up a voting center in Friendship, and people from around the state were able to vote by mail-in ballot. Of course, we don't have the resources that the government has in running an election, where they can have polling places in every town. But I know that many of you participated in that election. We had candidate forums here. I think we had 6 candidates that were running as delegates here from Wisconsin, and the three delegates that were elected were myself and Rudy Eckert, who is the son of Rick Eckert, and Brent Arnold. The Continental Congress was held in St. Charles, Illinois, and there were delegates. There were a few states where they didn't have enough people involved to participate, but there were delegates from 48 states, up to 3 delegates from each state, and we met for 11 days in St. Charles, Illinois. Now, the purpose of the Continental Congress was to review historical violations of the Constitution by the government, and to propose a course of action, to propose to our national government the action they need to take to get back to constitutional government, to propose to our state governments the action that they need to take to oppose federal tyranny, and also to make recommendations to citizens directly as to the things that we need to do. Many of the delegates, it was really kind of a wide range of types of people that were there as delegates. The man that was elected as the president of the Continental Congress, who presided over the meetings, was Michael Badnarik, who some of you may know. He was a former Libertarian Party presidential candidate. Some of the other delegates that you might know, Bob Schultz with We the People, he was a delegate from New York. Orly Tates, who is one of the lawyers that has a case against President Obama challenging his natural-born citizenship. Tom DeWeese, who does a lot of work on different UN land grab and different property rights issues from Virginia. I'm trying to think of who were some of the other more notable people that were there, but somebody who was not a delegate but had a lot of input and submitted various things for consideration by the Continental Congress was Dr. Edwin Vieira. And some of you may know him from his writings. I consider him to be one of the foremost constitutional scholars in the country. And Edwin Vieira, any of his books, if you look him up, if you're not familiar with him, you'll benefit from reading any of his books. And he had several recommendations that he sent to the Continental Congress. And it was a busy 11 days. We had a lot of work on our schedule, and I know there were many nights where, or mornings I should say, where I was up until 3 in the morning, 5 in the morning sometimes, working on different things. We would divide up into committees on various issues, and then bring things back and vote on things as the Congress altogether. And we heard excellent presentations. All of the proceedings of the Continental Congress are available online. If you go to cc2009.us, or you can get there through links from articlesofreedom.us. And the final document that we came out with is called the Articles of Freedom. And you can read the whole thing online. It's 60-some pages. It in itself is a pretty good piece of work for education on the Constitution and violations of the Constitution. And it also gives many recommendations for things that we as citizens can do directly, as well as the types of legislative efforts that need to be made in the states and in the federal government. And so I want to encourage you to, after you leave here today, I want to encourage you to do a couple of things. One is to go to articlesofreedom.us and read through the document. I can say I don't agree with everything that wound up in the final document, but with the bulk of it, I do agree. And many excellent recommendations. And where I think the Articles of Freedom really shines is a lot of times we put the effort on these various legislative efforts. If we could just get this law passed or just get that law passed. But the greatest thing that you can do to promote liberty where you live and in your community and in your state and in your nation is really just to live as a free person. You see, we so often give in to so much of the tyranny of government, and really what we need to do is live as free people. And there's many recommendations for things that you can do to assert your rights. It's a lot harder to take away a right or to violate a right if everybody is out exercising that right. You see, if everybody owns a firearm and exercises their Second Amendment right, and everybody carries a firearm and exercises that right, it's a lot harder to violate that right. It's a lot harder for the government to do it. If it's only a small group, it's a lot easier for them to do it because the majority doesn't care about that right. You see? And so there's many things that you can do to exercise your rights instead of waiting for the government to pass some new law or to repeal some old law to protect your rights again. You just exercise those rights. And that in itself, in many cases, will do more than pushing for some specific piece of legislation. And I think that's really where the Articles of Freedom really shines. It was interesting to me participating in all of those proceedings. The parallels between things like the original Continental Congresses and the Continental Congress 2009. By the way, let me say something about what Continental Congress 2009 was not, because if you go on the internet and look up some things about it, you'll see a lot of people making criticisms on various points. None of the delegates to Continental Congress 2009 thought that we were in any way some sort of a government authority or anything like that. All of the delegates were elected by a relatively small number of people that chose to participate. None of us were there, thinking we were going to establish a new government of the United States or anything like that. We were there to review violations by the government of the United States. And we were not there either to, one of the criticisms that some groups had was they said that what would come out of this effort was a push for a new constitutional convention, and we were not there for that purpose either. And in fact, it was for that reason that on the very first day when we were talking about the rules that would govern the Continental Congress, it was I who stood up and I proposed the rule that any motion that was calling for an amendment to the Constitution be ruled out of order. And that rule passed. And so throughout the Continental Congress 2009, there were times where people, were proposing various constitutional amendments and they were ruled out of order, because that wasn't our purpose there. Our purpose there was to review violations of the existing Constitution and show how we can get back to it. All right? And so again, we weren't there assuming we had any kind of governmental authority or any kind of a mandate like that. But there was always kind of a tension between some of the delegates who really wanted to kind of push some of these issues and push the envelope of what might be legal and that kind of thing, and those who were more willing to sort of work within the system. And what that does, that was a good debate because it reached kind of a happy medium of those things. And I think you'll see that if you go and read the Articles of Freedom. Now, the plan is, by the way, on that articlesofreedom.us site, there is a pledge that you can take and read that pledge and consider putting your name to it. That helps those recommendations have some more weight as they are presented to legislators if there are thousands and millions of Americans that have said, we agree with these things. And you don't have to agree with every word of the Articles of Freedom to sign your name to that pledge, but read the pledge and consider putting your name to it, and then consider coming on April 15th. April 15th, there's going to be a big tea party in Madison at the Capitol, and there are a group of us that are going to go around and distribute the Articles of Freedom to the offices of our state legislators. And I want you to consider coming and helping out with that effort on that day. And the goal of the Continental Congress and the Articles of Freedom, certainly is not to set up a new government or anything like that, but it is to present these honest and reasonable proposals that will move our country back to constitutional government. And we hope that candidates, there's a great new breed of candidates in this election year and in the coming election years, and we're looking for candidates that'll take that Articles of Freedom and make it a centerpiece of their campaign. We're looking for activists who will seek to promote it in their area and with their legislators. And so if you read that document, you find yourself in agreement with it, find a way to be involved in that effort. And if nothing else, just reading the Articles of Freedom will give you a great education in many of these violations of the United States Constitution and the direction we need to take to get back to proper, legitimate constitutional government. Thank you.
Wow, we caught up. We started out 20 minutes behind, and I think we're approximately 20 minutes ahead. Thank you very much, Richard, for those comments. I caught up on one particular phrase, exercise those rights. And one right I would like to remind you of, if you are on a jury, I hope that you realize that you have the right to judge both the fact and the law. And with all these tyrannical laws that are being passed out here, you are the final defense of liberty when you are on these juries. So I encourage you to exercise that right. If you want to find out more about your rights as a juror, look up fija.org, I believe it is. Tim Peterson.
Ken, do we have a couple of minutes to ask questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. Absolutely. We have plenty of time to ask questions. Go ahead, Richard. Pick it up where you left off. I wasn't booting them off.
Yeah, I should have done that. Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Naturally, I've got questions. I have questions all the time. I question authority. I question the government. But in particular, I'd like to question you on an issue that I think has many of us divided in this room. And that question is, how do we address the concept of term limits? I heard you speak earlier in saying we all have the power today to take our government back. And it happens every 2 years and every 4 years. And I couldn't agree more. But by the same token, I also realize that perhaps there was a fatal flaw in the Founding Fathers' original draft of the Constitution in not having a term limit amendment. And I was wondering if you could share with us your expertise in this area as you've studied this so very carefully.
I can tell you my opinion on term limits is that ultimately term limits become a limit on the people, not a limit on the government. And if you set the limit, for instance, at 2 terms and say that a legislator can only serve for 2 terms, what that means is that at about any given time, half of your legislators are lame ducks. And the only accountability that legislator has to you is that they want you to vote for them in the next election. And if they don't have the possibility to run again, now there's no accountability to the people whatsoever. And so while term limits, there's some good things about term limits. Certainly you avoid the career politician, you avoid these people that get entrenched in their seat, but I think the negatives outweigh that. Really, when it gets down to it, if the people want to put term limits on a legislator, they can do that. They have that power every election. They can put term limits on that legislator. And so many of the problems, I didn't mention it earlier when I talked about the Constitution, but so many of the problems with the government are not really problems with the government, they're problems with the people. You see, as long as people keep electing these corrupt legislators, that's what you're going to get. And so I would rather see people through election, give them term limits in that way, but don't make so many of these legislators lame ducks where they aren't accountable to anybody to get reelected anymore. Let's see, I think you were next.
Thank you. Ron Clark is the name. Do you have any thoughts on what we do about the problem with gerrymandering? Because that's one of the reasons we have career politicians.
Constitutionally, if you're talking about like federal congressional districts, That's something that has always happened. It's you know, going back all the way to the beginning, and we've got a census this year, and some of those districts will change, and I'm not really sure that there's anything you can do about it. You know, I suppose there might be some way through a constitutional amendment or something, but and maybe that's something that was overlooked in the original Constitution. I don't know.
Could I answer that?
Yes, sir.
I'd like to add a couple thoughts. There was a lady who spoke to the Patriots groups here in this building a couple months ago, and they brought up that there are thousands of fraudulent votes in Milwaukee County alone, and they're doing a determined effort to reveal and turn back these people and make your vote count, make it an honest count. That's one thing you can do to prevent this gerrymandering, is to make sure that our votes are counted properly so that they don't pack the elections with votes that shouldn't even be cast. That's real important, and it's like Lenin said, he who votes counts as nothing, he who counts the votes counts as everything. It's really, really important. It's really, really important that we have honest elections, and I'm not so much worried where Richard and I live, but I am worried about places wherever there's a university, there's a tremendous opportunity for fraud, in my opinion. Because these people might be voting at home, and they might be voting in La Crosse and Madison and Green Bay and wherever else they're going to school. So that's one thing that we can do, and the other thing is, we have to become educated, and we have to educate those around us so that we are going to elect honest people. And until that happens, term limits are not going to be consequential, because likely we're going to replace one crook with another, and likewise gerrymandering. If we have honest people, there won't be gerrymandering.
Carl.
My name is Carl Koenigs. I'm from the Marinette area, and I represent a group called the Americans for Constitutional Enforcement and the M&M Sons and Daughters of Liberty. And I just wanted to mention that Thomas Jefferson had spoken about the gerrymandering concern, and he wanted districts that were a certain amount of square miles so that you wouldn't have a group of people who were one side, left or right, and that that our candidates would be thrown in and out, basically, because the voting would be quite different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but by the way, in addition to things like the Federalist Papers, it's very interesting to read some of Thomas Jefferson's later writings after the Constitution had been put into practice for a while, because he began to see some of the limitations in it, especially in some of the things like the powers of the judiciary and other things. And it's interesting to see that perspective even early on, that he began to see some of the problems with it as well. All right, are there any other questions about the Articles of Freedom in the Continental Congress?
Just a comment and a question back on the term limits thing. One comment I'd heard from Earl Taylor, who teaches the Constitution class through the NCCS, is when he was asked about term limits, he said that what he had found in Arizona is that it really just empowered the staffers, and they become lifers basically, because they're the only ones that know what's going on. So there's always unintended consequences. Secondly, I realized that term limits were debated at the Constitutional Convention back in 1787. I was wondering if you, dealing with the Articles of the Articles of Freedom, if you had revisited that, and did that show up in the Articles of Freedom?
I don't believe the topic of term limits appears in the Articles of Freedom. I can't recall a specific place where it is right now. There's a lot in the Articles of Freedom about the power of juries, the power of sheriffs, state militias, these kinds of things. But I don't recall there being anything about term limits. All right. Yes, sir.
Taxation. Can you give a quick thing on taxation that came out of the Congress?
That was a topic we looked a lot at, and came to the conclusion that the constitutional amendment that allowed the income tax was never properly ratified, and that even the income tax code, even if you assume that amendment had been ratified, that the income tax code is largely misinterpreted, and applied to a lot of things that it should not apply to. But we heard a very good presentation by Jeff Dickstein, who is an attorney actually from here in Wisconsin, who represents, now you know his name, Bill Benson, the author of the book, The Law That Never Was, who was basically prosecuted for telling people that the amendment was never properly ratified, and was not allowed to present evidence in court that what he was saying was true. They said it didn't matter if what he was saying was true. He wasn't allowed to tell people that because he was basically helping, you know, or telling people to evade taxes or whatever. But I encourage you, go on the, I mean, he has, the attorney there had the certified documents from each state showing what the states ratified, and many of the states changed the wording in the amendment. So what they were ratifying was not the proposed amendment. And some of the states that outright did not ratify the amendment were certified as having ratified it. And it was just a complete, in fact, the Secretary of State at the time himself questioned whether it had been really ratified, and he basically got the answer back that it doesn't matter, just certify it anyway. So, yeah. All right, anything else? Yes, sir.
Do you have any practical advice on filling out the census?
Filling out the census, my practical advice, a census is constitutional. All they need to know is how many people live in your house. That's all they need to know. They don't need to know if you've got a mortgage or own your home or whatever. They don't need to know what race you are. You give them the information they need, which is the number of people, and that's it. You're not required to give them anything else.
You know any good lawyers will back you up on that?
Well, let me tell you what your risk is. I know all the census documents say that if you don't fill it out, you're liable for $5,000 in fines. The reality is you're probably liable, if they decide to go after you, for about $100 in fines. You know, you decide whether $100 is worth making the point or not.
I do know that there are attorneys all over this country waiting, chomping at the bit for the opportunity to challenge that if somebody gets fined.
All right, so that's got to be the last question there. Thank you very much.
Well, what we lack in size, we make up in enthusiasm and intelligence.